before I had thought, well, those are just family snapshots, and this West Oakland photographs are my serious photography. But then I decided by inventing that term, intimate documentary, that I could be a documentary photographer in the realm of my family and friends, people that were, available to me without intrusion.
That was American photographer, photo collage artist, and feminist Joanne Leonard on the moment she realised her intimate documentary approach to photography, which focused on her close personal relationships, could be taken as seriously as the street photography which historically dominated the medium. We speak about Joanne's early life growing up in Hollywood, her first experiences of photography, and honing her craft living in West Oakland in the 1960s, as well as the challenges of being an artist and single mother, gaining recognition of the Feminist Art Movement in the 1970s, and various other milestones in her long career. My interview with Joanne coincides with her first solo exhibition in the UK. In 2023, British art historian Griselda Pollock curated an exhibition at Huckleberry Fine Art in London called Medium and Memory, which included works from Joanne's ongoing series, The Newspaper Diaries, which we'll speak about later. And from the 29th of May until the 8th of July 2025, Huckleberry Fine Art presents vintage photographs and early collages featuring Joanne's photographs from the 1960s and 1970s, together with unique early collage pieces from the 1970s and 1980s. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You're listening to Subtext Discourse Art World Podcast, highlighting unique perspectives on contemporary art and photography. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. Our conversation began reflecting on Joanne's recent visit to London for the opening of her solo exhibition at Huckleberry, her first in the UK. How was it? Because you went to London last week, didn't you?
Yeah, it was great. Everybody was wonderful. The show looked really well done to me. Everything was, all the details were very much attended to, and people were extremely gracious and generous. So it was a great experience.
Oh, lovely.
And then The Guardian covered it. And I was hearing from people in California, as I woke up in the morning that, we're reading about you and everything. So that was lovely.
Yeah, really nice. I think I read it in the Guardian article as well, that you, although you're based in Michigan now, and you have been for, I guess since the 70s you moved to Michigan, didn't you?
Since 78.
Yeah, but you were born in Hollywood, weren't you?
Yes, I was born in Hollywood, yeah.
How was that? Because that's in the 1940s Hollywood.
Yeah, and it came about because my father was an exile from Hitler's Germany, and there's a whole community of people there in Hollywood that came there at the time in the cultural sphere. I even had found a book called Exiles in Paradise about this group of writers and musicians and composers and so on, who were the people, my parents. And my mother was a psychoanalyst, so also the psychoanalytic community. And so she had studied in Berlin. That's how she met my dad. So all of those people were the surrounding I grew up with in Hollywood.
Yeah. And you were in the film with Marlene Dietrich as well.
Yes, we were. In fact, my nephew just produced a marvelous, we had a screen test from Paramount Studios before we were chosen to be in this film. And it was a nitrite film. Is it nitrate or nitrite? Film that was the earliest motion picture film, was extremely flammable. There were some terrible fires in movie houses. So most nitrate film was destroyed, but he was able to transfer for this to digital film. And so he did that a number of years ago and got rid of the nitrate film. But recently he added a Marlene Dietrich song and made a lovely little film for us to see. And at the end, he also found a clip where the cameras were rolling. She fell carrying one of us and she broke her ankle. So she ended up in the hospital. It delayed the film. And another child is credited with being in the film instead of us.
Oh, no.
So there's that whole story, and he managed to kind of capture that in a little film he made.
And were you in any movies afterwards?
No, that her fall ruined my career in Hollywood. So I always say that after that I was behind the camera.
Yeah. And how was it then growing up in that space, or maybe looking back and thinking about the environment, being around a lot of creatives and musicians and actors and film directors?
I think that part was really good and exciting, and probably had a big general influence on my sister and me to both become artists. On the other hand, I think maybe we were more self-conscious than many people would be about our appearances because of as Hollywood is, sets such a high bar.
I guess relating that to photography, when did you first kind of get exposure to photography?
Well, in a couple of ways. My parents took us to see the exhibition called The Family of Man. It was so important. I saw it when I was about 10 or 11 and just thought it was so exciting. And I didn't then think, and I'll become a photographer, but I didn't have a big hurdle to imagine photography as something more than, what you do on a family vacation. Or I thought of it as a potential art form from that moment on. So that was a very big deal in a sense. On the other hand, I sent away for a camera that you could get for $1 and a Wheaties box top from the breakfast cereal box top. So I had a brownie style, very primitive camera that I was very proud of that I bought for myself, when I was a kid.
Oh, cute. So you did start really young then, taking photos.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't amount to much, but for years, I never really thought that I could understand f-stops and shutter speeds and things more complicated. So one of the first photographs that I took that I actually thought was pretty good was taken with a brownie camera. I mean, it become serious about photography, but I still was going to use a brownie camera because I didn't want to have to set the. But then I began to see how would they do that to make something in focus and something else not in focus. And I learned that, if you could change the f-stop and the shutter speed and all, you could play off movement against depth of field. Then I had to have a better camera. So, but it took me a while because I really thought I wasn't technically capable of understanding f-stops and shutter speeds. Couldn't figure out what I wanted to major in college. And I took an aptitude test that told me that I had high aptitude for scientific reading. So that told me, maybe you could understand f-stops and shutter speeds. And then I got a camera.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So it was in college that you decided, I can take this seriously now.
Yes. And in college, and where I went to college, there were no classes at the University of California at Berkeley at that time that I could take in photography. So I took other art classes, though I had a major in social sciences.
So I guess when you graduated then, did you step straight into photography or you were...
Well, I was taking one art class every semester along with my academic classes. And I was going to the library and looking at books of photography, old German scientific photographic annuals that some magazine they had in the library. And realizing how much I admired these other photographers and drawing from them, I thought, well, this won't really do. You can't draw from other people's photographs. You should make your own. So I went to a nearby technical college where they taught vocational courses. And so photography more seriously for practical uses. And they also taught dry cleaning and things like that there. So I went to this technical college to take a class and used a 4x5 camera and walked around in downtown Oakland, California as a start. But I didn't like the class at all. And so I just took advantage of being able to check out the camera and just sort of taught myself and got started from there.
So you mentioned Oakland. When did you move out of Hollywood? Oh, you were in Berkeley.
Oh, well, okay. So I skipped a bit there. I lived in Hollywood until I went to college. And so I started at Berkeley in 1958 and graduated in 62 and lived in Berkeley for a little while and then met the sculptor who I eventually married, and we lived in Oakland. So that's in the early 60s.
My geography of California isn't very good. So Hollywood, Berkeley, Oakland.
Hollywood is in Southern California. It's part of Los Angeles. And Berkeley is in the Bay Area across from San Francisco. And Oakland is just an adjacent city to Berkeley, a much bigger city than Berkeley.
Okay.
Berkeley is dominated by the campus of the University of California. So sometimes we refer to it as Berkeley, the campus, and sometimes as Cal, because it's the University of California at Berkeley.
And that part of the country as well was part of a lot of the civil rights movements were coming out of that area. Is that right?
So my generation was referred to as the silent generation. I used to think those students who we would read about demonstrating and so on must be much older than we were, because that seemed impossible. But almost immediately after I graduated from college, there was the People's Park. That was the name of one student rebellion. And then the activism on campuses became a very big thing.
Wow, okay.
So it kind of missed me.
Oh, interesting.
I did have friends who went to the South to help with civil rights. And then when I lived in Oakland, I lived in a very poor part of Oakland, and I became involved in neighborhood organizations that were attempting to improve we were in such a poor part of the city, partly industrial, partly residential. And the part we lived in didn't have curbs and gutters, and you couldn't have garbage pickup if you didn't have curbs and gutters. So there were rats. It was terrible.
Oh my gosh.
So we got involved to try to improve the living conditions in the part of Oakland where we lived, my husband and I. And that's the activism that I was part of at the time.
And so Oakland was like a hub for artists, or like a...
I wouldn't say so, not at all. We were there because the real estate was cheap.
Oh, okay, yes.
My husband was a sculptor, and he needed a big facility. Originally, he was making welded metal. Then he was doing cast metal. And then eventually he was making sculpture out of acrylic plastic and having to anneal it in a giant autoclave. And so it was an industrial setting.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it makes sense.
No art community, really.
But if I understood correctly, Oakland was where you kind of honed your craft a bit with your photography. Like you kind of really came into your own, or at least started developing.
Well, I began taking photographs of my neighborhood, and it was an unusual opportunity for a white woman to be photographing a largely Black community. And those photographs were very sought after eventually because of the record they made for, what I was able to see and record.
And is that where you would say you started this sort of what you called your intimate documentary style? Was it born of that era?
Yeah, I think that's a good lead into that, because I was really never cut out to be out on the street, unknown to the people around me, grabbing my camera and making photographs of people I didn't know. So I became comfortable enough through going to meetings and things in the community to be invited by some families in West Oakland to photograph their kids' graduation and weddings when there were marriages in the families. And after doing that for a while, I was patterning myself, I guess, as a photographer on ideas I came to from Dorothea Lange and some of the 1930s U.S. documentary photography that I knew. But as I realized how much I preferred photographing graduation and weddings to street scenes and strangers, I realized I could do that. I could take my own family and seriously. That just seemed like before I had thought, well, those are just family snapshots, and this West Oakland photographs are my serious photography. Yeah. But then I decided by inventing that term intimate documentary that I could be a documentary photographer in the realm of my family and friends instead, people that were, available to me without intrusion.
Yeah. Were many other people doing that at the time?
I hate to make any claims about being unique. I think maybe only by defining it, I had made it something of my own. But of course, other people certainly photographed. For instance, there's a photographer, Wayne Miller. He was a colleague of Edward Steichen, and together they are both credited with the show The Family of Men. And Wayne Miller made a book out of photographs of his family. Yeah. So definitely other people were doing it.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about it in the context of a woman's approach to photography, because I guess a question for me that's often come up is that if we talk about the male gaze a lot, and if there's a way that men photograph and there's a way that women photograph. And a while ago when I spoke with Yancey Richardson and Anna Walker-Skillman, they were saying often men are going out to take pictures and women are staying in and taking pictures. And when I read about the intimate documentary, I thought, yeah, that's like it really applies to how you've approached it, because you are turning it into your immediate surroundings and what you're close to, rather than you're needing to go and find things. It's just there's so much subject matter around me, and that you have that closeness maybe.
Yeah, I think that it's likely that fewer women go out, but of course there's Margaret Burke White and any number of journalist women, Lee Miller, and people who did work in a very different way. Probably we don't see a lot of the photographs of the women who are taking pictures of their family. I mean, because of being partnered with an artist, I had a sense of what you do as an artist to get your work shown. And, I took it to museums and asked whether they would want to collect it and so on. So many women who do the kind of photographing I do of their own family probably don't take their things to museums. So that's probably a bigger difference than what they do with a camera. Yes. I don't know if you know that Erik Erikson was a psychologist, and he postulated something about women and inner space and men. There was some experiment with like a dollhouse or something, and the boys all shot guns out the windows and the girls made little, and it's probably all stupid, but it seemed to prove what your friends were saying. Okay, yes. What this inside and outside thing. I think it's just cultural. I don't believe it's innate, actually, just part of expectations in a way that we're fulfilling that the culture has sort of described.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when did you very first start exhibiting your work, if these were the images you felt were serious?
Yeah, after I'd been photographing in West Oakland for a while, I was reading that the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which is the one I went to the most of the museums in San Francisco, I looked up, how do you get your work in this? They had a routine where you submitted a portfolio that would be reviewed in a review process that happened every few months or something like that. And I thought that sounded very indirect. And, at that moment when I began to think about it, I guess I was impatient. So when I called the DeYoung Museum and said, well, what's your process? They said, well, you just make an appointment with the director. And so I did that. And so I just said, I'm ready, I'm going to go. So this man, well, first of all, I got the time wrong and they thought I wasn't turning up. And then they said, oh, well, don't worry about it. He'll be back in an hour. And so I actually got to meet him, even though I messed up with the time. And then he said, well, I like these very much, but our schedule is full for at least a year. We couldn't do anything. And I thought that was the polite dismissal, that he wasn't really interested. But I said, well, that's okay. A year's fine. And he said, okay. And he got out his calendar and he wrote it on, and I couldn't believe it. So, so I was really happy. And I also was a little bit unsure. I think I wrote them a letter and said, could you write me and let me know, that you have this on your schedule? And I wanted to add, so I can really believe it. Yeah. But anyway, it was official. And on the basis of that, I bought a better enlarger, because I had a very primitive $35 enlarger or something.
Yeah.
So then I bought a really good enlarger at that time.
Were you always printing all your own work?
Oh, yeah.
Although I guess it must have been normal for photographers of that period,
yeah, it
really.
Was normal. It was normal. I mean, for a series photographer, there was Dorothea Lange had her work printed by a company in San Francisco, General Graphics. There's a limit to what you can do in your darkroom, and people want many copies, or they want something much larger than you can produce. So that was a very well thought of custom printing lab that I went to too, if for some reason I needed something really big. But for 90% of it, I did it myself. And if somebody else was going to print something for me, then I made the first print so they could see how I wanted it to be. And eventually I had some students that could come in and do some work for me. Once I had my daughter, and I had to figure out ways to keep going. Yeah. And I was for a while, I was doing weddings and portraits and things that I could hire somebody to print in my darkroom to make things happen too. I had to keep figuring out how to keep going ahead.
Yeah.
Have enough money and have enough supplies and everything.
So you mentioned then having students. Were you teaching at the time you were shooting weddings and living in Oakland?
No, I did weddings and portraits when I was married, and I felt responsible to pay for all my own supplies and equipment. But once I was not married anymore and on my own, I pretty quickly found that the best way I could support myself was teaching. So I was teaching at San Francisco Art Institute, and I taught in the summers at the University of California, had a summer program that then did teach photography. And I was teaching all over the Bay Area. I taught at Cal State Hayward, at UC Davis. Some of these places were an hour away. At one point, I was teaching at Mills College and UC Davis and commuting, but a lot, big distances. It was quite horrible.
Oh,
and my daughter was little and had an awful lot of babysitters.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, daycare and everything, because I didn't have any alimony or support from her dad.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, was that the same time that you were doing collage as well with your photography?
Took a little while. Some of the collages in the show in London are from 1969,
Wow.
which kind of amazes me. But the problem with intimate documentary was that it focused on happy, white, comfortable middle-class people. It was a very limited range of images. And I thought, I'm not oblivious to what's happening in the world. How can I demonstrate in my work that I'm, not this insular, limited person as an artist and a thinker? So the collage came as a way to layer on images that came to me through the news and to demonstrate an awareness and to bring my photographs into relationship with other kinds of imagery. I didn't take a lot of art history classes, but a lot of what interested me was what I learned about composition and about possibilities with materials and so on came from looking at art, which was something my parents had taken us to lots of exhibitions, and I continued to go and was aware of art in a more general way. So that's some of the reasons for collage.
Yeah. And how did you get to doing then because I read quite a lengthy article in Hyperallergic about your Journal of Miscarriage series that you did.
So at that point, I was wanting to be pregnant and then became pregnant. And I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to ever be able to spend the hours that it took to be in the darkroom once I have a child. So I was trying to take a page from the community of artists that I was involved with, included some painters who had stopped framing their work and were just putting grommets in the edges of the canvas and hanging them up on the wall. They didn't have to be completely flat. Photography was so regimented as far as you bought a commercially made photo paper and it came in a box and it was only certain sizes and all of that was a lot of regimen by comparison to this freedom of materials. So to gain some of that freedom and to find a way to make art that I thought might sustain me when I couldn't go in the darkroom, those were some of the reasons that I bought a standard sketchbook with lots of pages in it and started to just try to make collages without my photographs, just from magazine pages and so on. And so I started with a happy picture of being pregnant, the pregnant pair with the kind of dancing. Yeah. And then I had a miscarriage.
Oh my gosh.
Which my colleague Griselda Pollock, that you might have seen, was part of the exhibition in London, says she much prefers that we call a pregnancy loss, so that it doesn't sound like it's a mistake or something that's our fault,
Yeah.
And I like that idea. So I've used miscarriage for so long, I'm probably going to continue, but one could say a pregnancy loss. And I had started working in this book of sketchbook pages, maybe a little bit less, 11 by 13 or something like that, about that size. And so I put some blood on the few pages even before I went to the hospital for the aftermath of the miscarriage. And when I came back, I just continued to clip things and make artwork about that. And that's how that came about the loss and then about the longing for a child and so on.
Yeah. How was it received when you presented it to people?
Well, I was very excited about it. And I happened to go, by that time, my parents were living in the East Coast. And so I went to the Museum of Modern Art. I made an appointment and I asked if I could show it to curators there. And they hated it.
Really? Wow.
so I showed it actually to a major, well-known curator of photography. And that was the person with whom I made an appointment. And he was delayed. So his assistant came in and said, well, I could take a look if you don't mind. And he started looking. Then he just closed up the box that I brought it in and said, ugh. And so when this curator came in, he just paged through very even-handedly and then closed it up and said, I think this is about something we all know about, don't we? So he was dismissive.
Oh.
And so after that, I thought, I am never showing this to someone else. I still wanted other people to see it, but I just thought, I'm not going to be the person showing it to them because it's too uncomfortable. And so if someone's ever going to see this again, maybe I'll find somebody to take it somewhere for me. And I didn't do that for many, many years. So it was only when a colleague at the University of Michigan was starting to write about her own mother's pregnancy loss history for a journal. And I said, gosh, I have some work, you might be interested in. And she was very interested in, and it got included in her article in the Michigan Quarterly Review. But still, it was just a piece of it. It was then again in a couple of other literary journals and stuff, a few, but also only in black and white. So when my book was published, maybe you came across a reference to Being in Pictures, a book that I have. It's beautifully produced, and the center of it is the Journal of the Miscarriage. So that's fully reproduced in that book, and that was for the first time, and that was published in about 2008.
Wow.
So 1973 to 2008, it took that long for it to get published or known, really much. But now it's in the Whitney.
Oh, congratulations.
And then the V&A wanted a copy, and they paid for a beautiful reproduction of it. So they have a beautiful set, and the Whitney has the originals.
Yeah.
They had to restore some of them. It's pretty funny because there were condoms on some of the pages that deteriorated. So they had to restore the pages. But the piece had been, I should add, the piece was bought by a wonderful woman in San Francisco who had a gallery that represented me. And it was what interested her most about my work. And she acquired the journal. So Jeremy Stone bought the journal in the 1970s or 80s, maybe, and owned it for many, many years until the Whitney wanted to buy it or wanted it. And she donated it.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah. So it has a long history.
Yeah. Did you at the time ever feel like I'm part of the feminist art movement, or it was really only looking retrospectively?
Well, Miriam Shapiro, who started the Feminist Art Workshop with Judy Chicago in Southern California, happened to be in the Bay Area when I exhibited the journal very shortly after I made it. And she was extremely excited about it and wanted me to come and teach at the Cal Arts where she was teaching. But it was her feminism and then Judy Chicago's. And it's as though the feminist movement came out and found me.
Good.
And I wasn't really, I mean, I was just recently divorced. I was getting my sea legs as being an independent woman. And I had become consciously a feminist. But then when people would say, oh, who needs feminism? You know, why would you have feminism? We don't have maleism. And I said, oh, yeah, you don't. And that just comes naturally to you that because you're a male, everybody would choose you and forget. But Griselda Pollock, the historian and feminist art historian who was on a conversation with me in London just recently, she said that until the 1950s in the U.S., the history of art was full of women and very famous in their day. And many, many women had a reputation, were well paid, were commissioned to make portraits, were in the forefront of artistic production throughout Europe and even in the U.S. until the 1950s when Jansen's History of Art and Gombrich's History of Art, she said, sold 6 million copies each and changed the landscape by excluding women entirely. Oh. So Jansen's History of Art was published for 20 years and 6 million copies. And in 1986, Horace W. Janssen's son, Anthony Janssen, revised his father's book and included my work and the work of 20 women artists and restored the women, but only after the women's movement of the 1960s had kind of demanded it and outed these books for having, erased all the women artists. So that's something of the history of, I hate to say it, but I didn't notice, when I was taking history of art classes, I just thought that's how it is. I had heard of a few, Kathy Kollwitz, Marie Cassatt, and I thought, well, there just weren't any other women artists.
Yeah.
So it took a while. I wasn't the most, I was brought along and educated. And actually, when I began to meet Michigan feminist artists, they'd say, Miriam Shapiro, they didn't respect her because she was so inclusive. And they said, she's so untheorized. She doesn't, have an intellectual grounding for the kind of feminism she's doing, thinking about the role of culture, the role of race and class and so on, and in a more general way, and how the exclusion of women replicated some of that and was its own thing in another way. So her project was just to bring the names of every woman artist you could think of it, into the forefront. I mean, it was valuable what she did, but after a while, other feminists felt very much superior because they took it on as a much more profound project.
Yeah, wow. So I guess you eventually conceived, or you eventually became a mother. So
yeah, that's true. Yes, I did. Well, one conceives even when it has miscarriage.
Yes, true. Wrong words.
So
sorry.
Yeah, right. So yes, then we persisted, and I have my wonderful daughter. And then it was on to how to manage motherhood and still being an artist.
Yeah, because it wasn't long after then that you relocated, was it?
No, she was 3. I mean, before that, I've been teaching part-time many places. So putting together a living out of many different bits of employment. And now I had a real job, but a tenure track job, very demanding. And once you have a tenure track job, you also have to do service, be on committees. And then I was writing grants to support my work and to find ways to not have to teach during the summer. In the beginning, I was adding to my regular teaching assignment, teaching summer courses, and just to have enough money to make a go of it. So I was constantly writing grants and grant applications to try to get more money to be able to not teach all the time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't very successful at the grant. I mean, I wrote a zillion grants and got only a few.
And how was it initially then trying to balance? Because I know I'm speaking from the point of view of a father, but I guess for a mother, the demands are quite different. Like, how was it shifting from becoming a parent really and still maintaining an artistic practice? Like, how was that for you?
It was difficult. And I think, not just for me, but for my daughter. I she feels to this day, I think that it was very difficult for her to have so much caregiving, provided by other people than me. And I feel bad about that. It seemed necessary. I mean, in her view, I think she would have seen me not be so ambitious, so that, whenever I could, I would have spent time with her. And now it's kind of heartbreaking to think that's a decision that you're making all the time, well, but I won't be me if I'm not making some art, and, I have to have the time. And I found this great person that's going to be there, take Julia out on excursions and things like that, so I can get some time from floor, which is what I would do during this summer, and find students who would spend time with Julia and that I could pay in order to be able to have some time to work. I managed it, but I can't say it was, a success on every level. I managed to make artwork, but also you noted, you hadn't heard of me. I haven't had, it's been a gradual thing. And probably the years since I retired have forwarded my career the most, because I retired from teaching, and then I had such an accumulation of my own work. And I thought, what if Julia has to deal with this?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I'm pretty old, you know, I'm over 65 and now I'm 85. But what if she has to, you know, it's just going to go to the tag sales and stuff. So I started writing letters. I started kind of summarizing. I had major exhibits and I could say, my work has been in this book and that exhibition and so on. Would you be interested in acquiring? And it was received positively. So the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, the Jewish Museum, the International Center of Photography, just to name the ones in New York.
That's very impressive.
It took a lot of time and a lot of correspondence, and it's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And so at this point, it looks very good on paper, you know, and I look very, very well embraced. And, you know, and as I think you found when you looked at
absolutely.
and thought, oh gosh, how could I not have heard of this person? But it's easy. It's easy. They weren't there. And all these museums that have my work, most of them have not shown it yet. So, you know, it looks different on paper than in truth. Not to deny, you know, that I feel accomplished, but it's been a long track, and I'm not a household word after all. You know, not yet anyway.
Oh, I mean, it's great that you, I guess that you have this sort of in your, I don't know how you describe it. Didn't they say like in your fourth chapter or in your twilight chapter or something that when you get...
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like the term twilight, although it's probably true. But yes, in the late chapter, yes.
That you can know, but that you can really, that you have time for you, that you don't have to worry about your students or raising your daughter and things.
That's true. I really didn't have the time. You know, I wouldn't have been able to make such a concerted effort as I have had with respect to correspondence and facilitating the acquisitions and so on. Could not have done that while I was teaching. I mean, if people had been interested and were coming to me, it would be a different story. They'd be doing a lot of the work. But as much of it has depended on my effort, it's only something I think I could have accomplished at this juncture.
Yeah, wow. You had taught for, it was 40 years, wasn't it, that you were a university professor?
Yeah,
I was wondering, for some of the artists and photographers that regularly listen, are there any lessons or pearls of wisdom that you would often impart on your students that would come up over the years that it's like, no, this is something that all my students need to know as a way of maybe like cultivating a lifelong practice or making time for your work or persevering? I
don't know where both my twin sister and I, we both have, you know, this great sense of ourselves as this is what we do and what we're about. And we wouldn't be the same if we weren't doing it. And I don't really know how we got that. So I can't impart that or find a secret to pass on to somebody else about that. But I guess sort of using every minute of your time, you know, that, I mean, my daughter would also have loved it if I had been a good cook. And if I had I wrote things off the table that most people would consider just normal. I think I'm abnormal. I never cook. I mean, I stick things in the microwave. By now, people are wonderfully helpful and go shopping for me. All of that stuff that's, you know, the house. I mean, my house isn't a mess. I keep things tidied up. But any kind of deep cleaning gets done by someone else. And so taking things off the table, whatever you can do, not having a lot of sidelines, you know, like if you're also a professional skater or, you know, or if I didn't have those other things. This is it. So I was very single-minded. And I also left things off the list that most people would consider essential occupations, you know, like cooking. So I don't know what to say about that. I mean, most people probably wouldn't approve. So
no, I think it's just you have a clear vision. Like I'm making my art. That's my focus, and that's what I prioritize.
Yeah,
I'm guilty of it. Like there's all of these other little things that I need to do first, and then when I've finished all of that, I'll do my art. It's like, well, then you'll never do your art.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I do have hundreds of lists. I mean, I have things that I have to do, you know, mail this or clean up this corner or, you know, I have lists and I do, you know, all kinds of menial things, but I've taken some big things off the list and one of them is cooking. So not everybody would do that.
No, I need to keep that one on, I think. There's one story that we haven't touched on that somehow seems unrelated to everything else. In 1972, you were the official Winter Olympics photographer for the United States.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So let's see. A wonderful man named Francisco Ortiz, was teaching a class he was a stringer for Time magazine. That means that while he was in the Bay Area, they could call him and ask him to do he would do freelance assignments for Time magazine. So he visited our studio to photograph my husband when his work was in some big New York show. And that's how he happened to see my photographs of West Oakland on the walls. And he was a person of color, and he was very taken with my photographs and how much they suggested that I had a rapport with the subjects. So he was teaching a class in San Francisco, and a student of his this is like a Shaggy Dog story. It has so many parts, but a student of his was an executive for Bank of America. And he asked Fran, this photographer, if he would make photographs for Bank of America of the Winter Olympics that Bank of America could put their name on.
Okay.
And he said, and we'd like you to go with Imogene Cunningham.
Oh.
And Imogene Cunningham was a Bay Area photographer who was in her 80s or maybe even her 90s then. And she said, are you kidding? It would kill me. So he had to think of someone else, and he thought of me because he'd visited our studio and liked my photographs so much, and thought if anybody can get to know this, create a different kind of reportage of the Olympics, so more personal, and get to know the people that they're photographing, or have that aspect of the photographs be the prominent one, not the spectacular sports view, but the human interest part. So he wanted me as a partner he would do the sports things, the hockey and stuff, ice hockey, and I would do the human interest part. And that's why he asked me if I would go.
Oh, wow.
And I was just newly divorced, and it was a fabulous opportunity. And so I went.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Because it was in Japan, wasn't it?
Yes, it was in Sapporo, Japan. And he called me when I was visiting my parents in Connecticut and said, can you come with me to the Olympics? And we have to leave in a week. And I had to come back to California and get all the shots. I don't know, we don't seem to have all kinds of injections now when we go to Europe. But to get an international visa and stuff, you had to have yellow fever, all kinds of injections. Get the passport in order and everything. And then we flew off. We went to Alaska, and then from Alaska over to Sapporo.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was kind of miraculous and amazing.
I mean, you must have really felt like, I'm a photographer now.
Well, no, I felt very out of my depth. I wasn't that kind of photographer at all. I mean, what did I know? I used Fran's, I didn't have any telephoto lenses. There's pictures of me with all kinds of cameras hanging off of me, even in a film that I once saw that has a little glimpse of me. But they were Fran's cameras. I had only the one camera, and, so, no, I didn't think I had arrived at it. I thought, good grief, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've never photographed sports. I knew nothing about sports. No, I felt very out of my element. It's just miraculous I was able to do anything that they seemed pleased with.
How did that change you, moving forward?
Well, I guess it answered whether I would ever want to do that, which I figured out I didn't. I didn't really want to travel, and I wanted my life to be located one place and do what I could do from there. So if I had had any temptation before or thought that I should or could be a journalist, it kind of ended it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did okay, but I loved being in Japan, but I didn't love being a journalist. Not at all.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be very stressful, I think.
Yeah, you have one chance and, have to get the picture and all that. It's not my thing at all.
No. I don't know if that was your first commission, but there was one I read that you had not long after, the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts for Technology in American Lives.
Oh, so that turned out to be very important. A Bay Area photographer, we both had shown at the DeYoung Museum. He saw my first show at the DeYoung Museum, and he had the show right after. So his name was Chauncey Hare. He actually worked for Standard Oil, and it had a miraculous career as a photographer. He had 3 National Endowment grants or 3 Guggenheims and 2 NEA grants. He was just miraculously capable at grant writing, which I already mentioned. I'd written lots and mostly didn't get them. So he wrote a grant. He hated where he worked. He hated Standard Oil. And his photographic project was about the really put upon nature of the circumstances of Standard Oil workers and employees. So he was photographing them at work and at home. And he called his project The Impact of Technology on American Life. And he asked Bill Owens, have you heard of the book Suburbia? Bill Owens is a Bay Area photographer who photographed Livermore, which is a suburb of the Bay Area. They're kind of marvelous photographs. Bill Owens and I both studied with the anthropologist John Collier Jr.
Yeah.
So Bill, really, I told him his work was marvelous. And he said, if my work is so marvelous, why don't I make a lot of money? He was actually kind of driven by more commercial desire, but he did this wonderful project. So Bill Owens, a documentary photographer, and Chauncey Hare and I had this money that Chauncey had gotten to do the impact of technology on American life. And Chauncey wanted a woman's perspective. And Julia, my daughter, was 2 years old. So I thought, I can't do what Chauncey's doing and go out and find subjects here and there and do a major documentary project. I have to do something very defined and confined. So I took every house on my block and attempted to find the home technology, the stoves and refrigerators and countertop appliances. And eventually, as you mentioned, when Julie was little, I moved to Michigan. I did part of the project. I used photographs I made when I went to see my family in the East Coast, but I was photographing home technology. So kitchen countertops. And when my work started to be shown, first the West Oakland photographs, now the most interested is in these photographs of home interiors. The Museum of Modern Art, that's what was shown there. And so there's a great deal of interest in these photographs now that I made during that project that Chauncey got. We each got about $3,000. It was not a big amount of money.
Yeah, but I guess they're really a document of the time for how people lived in their houses.
Yes, and it took a while for those to have any kind of currency. I personally didn't think they were that interesting. So they weren't the ones that I was showing to people, would you be interested in my photographs? But eventually they look much more interesting now than they did immediately. So.
Yeah, I think often with a lot of work, it's until you add time to them.
Yeah, they do gain something with looking back. And people are very happy to say, oh my gosh, I had one of those. When you see an old Cuisinart, when they were just kind of new on the market, microwave ovens were pretty new then. And then I photographed homes that had the same stove for even already 20 years. So some of these things are really old by now, especially.
Oh, and some of them, I guess some of the things probably don't exist anymore, or things that were a trend then.
Yes. And, gas stoves and things like that. Yeah. Oh, you mean modern things like Cuisinart? Who uses that anymore? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Things that were standard then that everybody had. Now nobody has.
Yeah, right.
There's one project that, as I understand, you've continued for quite a long time and you're still doing now in your mid-80s, called the Newspaper Diaries.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. One thing that really interests me is some of the small collages that they have in the exhibit in London are triptychs that are three-dimensional pieces, but each one of them has things from the newspaper. So those are from 1969, early 70s. I've been finding ways to use the newspaper for a very long time, and without it seeming like a continuity, there is that aspect of continuity in my work. The Newspaper Diary actually started with my first digital camera, and I don't know why I chose to photograph a book, but just something handy to make a test, photographing with the digital camera. And it took a while to figure out something to do with that, but I love the look of an open book. So what could I do with an open book? And bringing the clippings from the newspaper to something in a book that's parallel. So I have something that I'm finding in the newspaper that I've kept newspapers that I just can't throw away because the pictures are so wonderful, not knowing what the heck I would do with them. Now I tend to go look for a book that might have some picture with some parallel to what is in the newspaper. So that's essentially the formula, if you might call it, for the newspaper diary. And it's something I've been able to sustain since about 2006, like even till now, to clip something that just strikes me as marvelous from the newspaper. I mean, sometimes horrifying, not always marvelous in a sense, and excellent, capturing a really fantastic photograph that I just can't throw it away. So I save it. And then I try to find something that I think has an interesting resonance with it. So often they resemble each other, but sometimes it's some other kind of way that they support each other or, speak to each other across that. So I open the book to a page. I put the clipping always with the credit to the photographer visible, and with some bit of text, usually not headline, but what do you call it? The title bar or something from the article, the heading, so that there's some orientation to the source and credit to the source and the date, and always the date. So it's not a journal in the strict sense. It doesn't happen every day. There's no exact regularness to my accumulation of these things, but over a time, it is keeping track of time and the things that are happening in our day, not, to me personally, so much as a journal of the news.
It's nice because you're still kind of harking back to what you were doing before, that you have like the internal and then you've got the news stuff as the...
And it goes in a way to another question you asked me, how I what kind of word I would leave for someone else. Finding a project that you can define. I mean, as much as it took me quite a few words to define this project, but in as much as I know what I'm doing, as I'm looking for something that I can continue to do this thing, that helps me keep going. And I think it's very helpful if somebody is asking, how do you keep going? I mean, you have to pick it up after, everything, like as you say, the kids and everything else you're doing gets in the way. If you have something that you kind of know what you're looking for, what you're doing, then I think you can do it some more, even without, people think art is about being inspired, but I mean, maybe you call that inspiration, I get excited about a picture or something, but it's not inspired in the way people might imagine. I mean, it's almost like having a formula and being able to plug something new into it. And it's very helpful to me. It might be helpful to somebody else.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's good advice. Having a project and turning up.
Yeah, that you can just keep going on it. You kind of have the general outline of it and you can fill in with new pieces when you have a moment.
Yeah, no, I think definitely helpful. And it's also removes that excuse that you don't have time.
Right, because you need time when you're at a total loss and you have to think, how can I get started again? Yeah. How can I get back into it when I've let it go for so long? I'm not inspired. I just don't know what I'm doing. And so how can you do that when the next minute the phone rings, the kids need you, you have to pick them up from the playground or whatever. It's too hard to sustain it or to get back into it. So if you have this little bit of an outline, if you have this formula in a sense, and that's what the newspaper diary has been for me.
Oh, really? That's really nice.
Thank you, Michael.
It's been lovely speaking with you, Joanne. I'm happy we met, and it's been good to learn more about your life, and I'm happy I know that I'm aware of your work now, and I can tell other people.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed learning about the life and work of Joanne Leonard. Her first UK solo exhibition, Vintage Photographs and Early Collages at Huckleberry Fine Art in London, continues until the 8th of July 2025. In the show notes, you can find links to Joanne's official website, as well as the exhibition at Huckleberry in London. I've also included links to the articles in The Guardian and Hyperallergic that were mentioned in the show. You can catch the latest episodes of Subtext and Discourse Art World podcast by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone interested in the overlap of photography and the art world, please send them a link to the show. If you have any comments, feedback, or questions about this or previous episodes of the podcast, you can reach me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Threads. Otherwise, you can use the contact form on my website, www.michaeldooney.net. There you will also find the International Photo Festival database I've put together, as well as my webinar for photographers and artists working in lens-based media to better understand the art market and get their work into galleries. That's all for now. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.